It looks like we're still waiting for Pete.
We need Pete and Reggie. Pete and Reggie.
Reggie's there.
Oh, Reggie? You got Reggie? I don't see the number.
He doesn't have his video on, but he's on.
Okay.
But we don't have Matt.
Okay, we gotta wait. We gotta have Matt on.
I'm sorry, I stepped away from my screen for just a second. Mr. Chairman, this is Heather, County Attorney. I'm not sure if y'all discussed it or not, but since you are doing an entire new meeting, you're gonna have to read that introduction again.
Yeah, he's aware of that, Heather.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the rest of my board members to come on back on.
We're still waiting for Matt also.
We got John. I mean, I see we got John. We have Pete. Pete is the one I'm looking for.
Does somebody have a speakerphone on? Because we got a feedback loop happening.
Not me.
Just say, hey, Wayne, around here.
Okay, we got Pete on now.
Yeah.
We have all board members on. We'd like to welcome everybody back to our budget meeting.
Right there.
At this time, Betty, could you read the emergency, not emergency, but the declaration for electronic meeting?
Yes. On March 31st, 2020, the Middlesex Board of Supervisors ratified a declaration of emergency issued by the county's Director of Emergency Management and adopted emergency procedures to ensure continuity of county government. A copy of this ordinance can be found on the county's website under Board of Supervisors /ordinances number 81. These procedures include the ability for the Board of Supervisors and other county public entities to conduct electronic meetings. Information on how to access these meetings is by video and telephone will be posted on the county website. The provisions of the emergency ordinance and electronic meetings is in effect for a period of 60 days unless amended, rescinded, or readopted by the Board of Supervisors. An audio recording is being made of the meeting, which will be linked from the county's website. Notice of the meetings, along with access information, has been posted on the county's website and at the front of the historic courthouse. An electronic meeting link was also sent to those persons that have asked to be part of the board's agenda list. As each person joins the meeting, the public audio will be muted to avoid background noise, and the board and staff audio will be open. If a meeting calls for public comment, the chairman will announce that the meeting is open for comments and public lines will be unmuted. Those with an audio connection should use *9, which will notify the moderator that you wish to comment. To unmute your own phone, you should use *6. Those with video capability are to use the raise hand feature to be recognized by the chair. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak, and each speaker must identify themselves when speaking. All votes will be by roll call and recorded in the minutes. Board members who leave the meeting or arrive must verbally note their attendance. If all board members are not joined by video, a roll call will be made every 2 hours to confirm a quorum.
Are there any questions about this process from the board? If not, roll call.
Mr. Koontz?
Here.
Mr. Mansfield?
Pete, turn your mic on.
Mr. Mansfield?
Hello, yes.
Okay. Mr. Williams? Mr. Williams, are you there?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you are. Mr. Kimbrough
Here.
and Mr. Jesse.
Here. All right, at this time, we're gonna go over our county's budget. I'm gonna turn it over to Matt Walker.
Matt, your phone is muted.
We don't hear you, Matt.
Betty, is he coming in on 4330?
He was trying, yes. He
Okay,
was
I can
gonna-
merge it. All right. Let me try to merge it.
Did you unmute him?
Yeah, he shouldn't be muted.
He said he was going to call back in.
Wayne, can you hear me?
Well, I hear you now.
All right, very good. I had to reboot everything. It didn't like me going straight from one Zoom meeting to the other, so I literally had to shut down and restart the computer and everything. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and we will get started. Let me see. Here we are. Okay, can everyone see the welcome screen
Yeah, we see
on the
it.
budget? Okay, very good. Okay, well then, I think y'all already handled all the pleasantries and go to my presentation. This is a very abbreviated budget presentation, but I think it will give the board and the public, and welcome all public joining the meeting, the information that they need. This is the public hearing on the 2021 Middlesex County budget, the 2021 Middlesex County Public Schools budget, and the 2021 proposed tax rates. I'm going to go over the proposed revenues, proposed expenditures, proposed school budget, capital reserve fund, and the capital improvement projects, and the proposed tax rates, as well as other key issues affecting this year's budget. Of course, it need not be stated, one of the reasons why this may be a very abbreviated presentation is we are dealing with COVID-19 at this current time, and that is a very challenging thing to be dealing with and doing our normal work as well. But here we are. The county and school staff really began working on this budget as early as October 2019. I think the superintendent may be in the audience. We have been really working on the budget throughout the year with the joint schools and county budget and finance committee working through issues as they arise. The Board of Supervisors began work in earnest on this budget on January 10th at a work session where we discussed major strategic issues facing the budget. The Hampton Road Sanitation District sewer studies and relating project was one. Of course, an update on the Middlesex County Water Authority's endeavors to move forward with the Eastern Middlesex water system. And of course, last but not least, the Board of Supervisors' goals and objectives for the 2021 budget. We continue to work on the budget over the course of several subsequent work sessions. And of course, as the board knows and the public may have read in the paper, as the COVID-19 emergency came upon the scene, we kind of had to pivot in mid-process. I know the schools have had to as well, and try to kind of regroup and come back and really look at just passing a bare bones budget that gives us a good middle ground where we may be able to make further cuts if necessary and further adjustments to revenue as necessary relating to the national economy and the state economy, and of course state funding affecting the schools. Last but not least, the advertisement of the budget in this public hearing does allow the county to adopt a budget prior to its May 15th deadline. I was on the phone this morning with VACO. They're not aware of any state easing of the deadline for the county to pass at least a school's budget. I'm happy to say it's my opinion that we really don't need an extension on the deadline for the county's schools and the tax rates. I think we've got a good bare bones budget that we can live with. I do think we should review this budget and consider this budget in light of the possibility of future changes. We're getting more and more information every day on how the current pandemic is going to affect finances, affect state funding, federal funding, both good and bad, to what extent we qualify for CARES funding, for instance, through the school system or through ourselves. Things of that nature basically lead me to say the comment of this budget season is we're adopting something bare bones, but further adjustments and further consideration of impacts to the budget will probably have to be considered really throughout the summer, and we'll go from there. Real quickly, revenue topics. No real estate increase. The real estate tax rate remains 62 cents. Personal property tax, there is no increase on personal property tax. The personal property tax remains $2.10 per 100 assessed value on most personal property items. Jet skis, RVs, the rate remains $1.75 per 100 assessed value. And of course, I'll mention this, there's been no proposed change on boats over 5 tons or under 5 tons. Those rates all stay the same in this proposed budget. There is an increase in public assistance and welfare transfers to the county and revenue from fund balance or reserves used to balance our operating revenues. And I will speak to that in greater detail in a moment. First, public assistance and welfare revenues from the state and federal government have been increased to the county by an estimated $93,000. That's basically pass-through monies. We've had to increase funding certain things, and we get reimbursed by the federal and the state governments for those, and that's reflected in the budget. Fiscal year 21 budget incorporates an increase in revenue from fund balance of $200,000 to pay for our once every 5 to 6 year reassessment. That's really not optional. We need to get that done in order to meet state requirements on having an accurate and equitable reassessment of real property at least every 6 years. Those monies, we have put aside, I think, up to $90,000 in kind of a little set-aside fund to help pay for those. So $200,000 is coming in from reserves in an effort to pay for reassessment. Also, this budget contains a transfer from reserves into our revenue line items to balance the budget of $567,627 for operating expenses. So in a sense, what that does is we're bringing in money from our rainy day or our savings fund, our reserves, to help us balance this operating budget, which means if operating costs don't go down next year, we will probably need to consider either a tax increase or cuts to funding or further monies coming in from reserve accounts to continue to balance the budget.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question of the county administrator, or should we hold questions to the end?
You can answer right now. That way you'd be on your mind.
Yeah, it would be hard to hold on to.
Right. Go ahead.
Matt, have you heard, I know you have a network of county administrators locally and across the state. Do you have a sense for how many other counties of our type are reaching into fund balance?
I do not. We have a conference call tomorrow with the county administrators. My gut and my instincts tell me that a lot of them are, but I have not posed that question. I
Would you
will
take
say
it-
this, I don't think many counties are considering tax increases at this time. So if they do wish to maintain a semblance of consistent funding, they're pretty much going to be driven to do so.
Yeah, would you mind taking an action item for that call? Just do an informal poll and report back to us. Let us know what other counties are doing. Thanks.
Absolutely. We'll definitely do, and I can definitely get that done by the time the board needs to make a decision on the budget, which I believe is on May the 7th, if I believe. Yes, will do. So was there any other questions? Okay, then moving on. I'm not going to go line by line through all of the revenues. Of course, everyone who has the paper or has been online has seen the revenues versus last year, relatively flat. We'll explain a couple of key points. We are incorporating a new projection on personal property tax revenues. That's largely due to the assessed values of certain classes of personal property. So that is incorporated in the budget. Other local taxes are pretty much consistent. The $52,500 increase in other local taxes is primarily attributed to increasing the county's lodging or transient occupancy tax from the 2% that we were allowed to do last year to the 5% that will be allowed to move to July 1 of 2021. The board had elected or by consensus proposed that we not move that rate to 5% starting July 1, instead looking at moving the rate and implementing that rate on January 1, 2021. And that's in deference to the current situation with the pandemic. Our current lodging industry voluntarily and hearty appreciation for them for doing so, remaining closed for another month to get a better idea of how this pandemic is going to affect Middlesex and the certain other accommodations that they're trying to make to move into this new normal, if you will. So I think the $52,500 does represent an increase in that line item starting January 1. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Want to spend some time on this slide. A couple of key factors in this budget that I think are worth noting. The increased revenues coming in from fund balance. You notice I've highlighted fund balance for capital projects. That is a overall decrease of over $1.1 million in capital projects funding. So we have significantly reduced potential capital improvement projects next fiscal year, while at the same time bringing in monies from fund balance to pay for the reassessment, as I mentioned, and also $567,000 for fund balance for operating expenses to balance the budget. Overall, the budget, all funds, is decreasing $379,000, or a decrease of about 1%. And that's largely attributed to the decrease in capital funding for capital projects. With regard to expenditures, when we embarked upon this budget, we had incorporated a 5% salary adjustment for school and county staff. That has largely, well, not largely, that has been removed in its entirety. There is no funding for increases to compensation in this budget, and that is largely in light of the financial situation in the country and the pandemic facing us and the uncertainties that provide. So those monies are removed, and this again presents a bare bone budget without those compensation increases. The county's annualized health insurance, which is our practice, has been funded. That was actually voted on back in December with the current increases. and I can speak more to that in detail. I think we did have a couple of specific questions regarding why certain departments went up substantially, and that's part of the reason, but I'll move to that in a moment. There is a fairly large increase in funding to the sheriff's office, and that's primarily due to a couple of factors. Increased staffing to support the conversion of animal control over to the sheriff's responsibilities. There's also some funding in the sheriff's budget to support the leasing of several new vehicles. There are several older vehicles, as the board's aware. Those have remained in the sheriff's budget for funding. A big mover in this budget is our Middle Peninsula Regional Jail. The regional jail detention costs have went up substantially, largely because we're not getting the number of inmates from Northern Virginia that we once were, and we're picking up a larger portion of the tab for running the jail for our relative impact in number of inmates that we have in the regional jail. So detention costs went up. In recent years, we have seen fluctuations in those costs, but the Middle Peninsula Regional Jail's request increased $180,000 in this fiscal year. Funding increases for the Department of Social Services, $142,000, largely for Comprehensive Services Act funding and other entitlements, which again are largely reimbursed by the state and federal governments through pass-through funding. Getting into a little bit more of the details on some of the increases with the general fund expenditures by department. One question that we had, and I'm not going to single y'all out, but there was a question, why did the Board of Supervisors increase 22% this year? Well, the board's not getting a raise. It's primarily because we have new board members and we have insurance costs. The new board members are on a health insurance and those costs are borne, and that's always been the practice. So that is why that increase. There was also some question, well, why is the administration increasing so much? Well, we're really not. It's largely level funding across categories. We've had some staffing changes in the commissioner's office and in the treasurer's office, which that is reflected in that major function code. We've also incorporated the reassessment. The reassessment we're required to do by the state, the $200,000 for reassessment is incorporated in that major function code. So that's the reason for that large increase on administration. Elections has an increase, but we have been told, and I'm satisfied our register and some of the electoral board are on this call, we have been told that one of the budget amendments proposed by the governor is to hold the funding of certain increases to salaries at the elections office, registrar in particular. We are going to wait for final word of that. I think that's going to be the case. So those monies, while they are budgeted, may not be appropriated by the time we appropriate the budget because the reimbursement's not going to flow from the state as we had believed. So that's one of the adjustments that may be made to this budget even after its adoption by the time the board comes back around to appropriate the budget later in the spring or early summer. Of course, law enforcement, this includes the increase to the Sheriff's Department, approximately $198,000. And the increase to the regional jail of approximately, well, not approximately, $180,000, $176,000. The decrease to animal control represents the shift of the animal control functions moving to the sheriff, the lack of the need for certain vehicle expenses, and of course salaries of some of the officers, animal control officers. What is remaining in animal control in next year's proposed budget are the numbers needed to operate the shelter, which still remains under the control of the Board of Supervisors. Solid waste increase, the increase that's budgeted for that is largely an increase due to our commitment towards the maintenance and operations center being constructed in King and Queen County that we are participating in. We haven't heard that project has been paused, so we have budgeted for it as requested by VIPSA, and I think there's also some money in there for some improvement and some remediation at our closed landfill on a properties joining that or a property adjoining that landfill, which the board has been briefed on in the last meeting. We have meetings with DEQ staff and our consultant engineers to go through that, and we'll kind of see where that goes. But money is included in that for those purposes. I guess the next item of consequence would be the social services, welfare and service organizations. This is the increase in funding I mentioned earlier for social services largely. Just a minor point, the board several years ago had created an account to help fund school classes, school teams that win national or state championships and other school activities where we have our students that do extremely well and they need to go to state or regional levels to compete. The board created this line item to help fund travel expenses, things of that nature. We were pretty much forced to cut that back to its previous level from several years ago of 2000. And of course, depending on whether we're back in school in the fall, would depend on whether those monies need to be trimmed back further in light of really not having any teams going anywhere, but that's something we'll watch. Pretty much level funding all the way along down the line. Again, some of the increases you see in planning and other categories largely attributed to people on health insurance, things of that nature. Non-departmental expenditures. I want to spend a little bit of time on that, if I may. This is your line item or department where you have two line items. You have the contingency account, which is where the board has historically budgeted a little bit of money to handle those unforeseen circumstances as they arise through the budget year. And our reserve for capital expenditures, which currently totals $854,000 pledged for potential sewer projects throughout Middlesex. You will notice the very last bit of contingency has been cut out, but the money for the capital reserve pledged towards the possible sewer projects is still there. If those monies go unspent, they go to fund balance. If we do start spending some monies out of that account, those monies would be moved or transferred up to the county debt service line item to help cover the debt service for this project. And I can speak more on that later if we have questions. That gets us into the final slide dealing with the county expenditures, and that's our transfer to the Middlesex County Public Schools. You'll notice that transfers on local money decreased $256,000. We believe the schools are going to be okay. We do know that the state funding that they thought they were going to get a few months ago has been trimmed back due to some of the governor's amendments and suggestions. This is one of those areas, as I've said in the work sessions, and I'll repeat tonight, where we're probably going to have to watch this, and we may need to come back and revisit that, depending on what the final outcome at the state and the federal level are for funding of schools. I'm hopeful that we're going to bring in some CARES funding for the school system, but there's a lot of unknowns in this one, gentlemen. I think John Coon said it best. He's been on the board for 3 years, and the budgets keep getting worse. I've been doing budgets in one stripe form or the other for 27 years, and I think this is the worst one yet. And they're not getting better either. So interesting times for sure. School debt service was kept flat. There was some discussion about potentially doing the HVAC project at the elementary school. I think there's more information that's going to be forthcoming on that. And we'll probably be discussing that with the school board over the next several months. School capital improvements. That is a substantial decrease from last year. The school capital improvements, which I'll go into a little bit greater detail in a moment, basically include buses and some capital outlay for some much needed carpet replacement at the elementary school. That's it, $390,000, which is a pretty substantial decrease from the year before. Textbook fund, relatively, we're funding the amount we need to leverage state.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, just if I may make one comment. Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, on the school CIP, it's important. The bulk of what we're doing there is representative of two things. One, the schools have postponed some CIP, which is laudable. But also the major expense with these school buses is going to help with the comment that Matt quoted me on a minute ago, where these budgets keep getting horrible, or I guess worse. By buying two buses at once, we're buying electric school buses that are going to be hugely subsidized by Dominion, and the operating and maintenance costs are going to begin to come down. So it looks like a big hit to the budget this year, but next year we won't be buying a school bus as a result. And our operation and maintenance costs are going to go down, which means there's more money available for the schools or whatever we choose that money for. The point is we're getting our cost slightly better under control, or I guess under control is not the right word, but lowering the cost of operation and maintenance and fuel. So this is a blip in the sense that it's abnormal from our normal of $96,000 a year per bus, but it has a payback, and I just wanted to make that note.
All right.
I think it's well said, and it also honors our commitments to, as John has rightly said, to continue to purchase buses on the previous schedule that we had with, I think it's Spotsylvania School System. We have cooperative procurement with them, and we're able to get a better deal on the buses. Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll move on. Okay, well, brings us to the county capital improvements. Again, a substantial decrease in the county capital improvements. We have funded basically the capital improvements that we are in need to fund to continue to leverage state grant monies in a variety of avenues, and I'll go into greater detail on that. So again, an overall decrease of $379,000 in this budget, or a 1% decrease. Board of Supervisors proposed 21 or FY21 school budget. Before I go into this, I want to explain there was a little bit of a glitch in the ad for this budget. We had submitted an ad to the paper. The paper sent us back a proof, but somehow, shape, or form, the previous adopted budget had been superimposed over the school portion of the budget. And specifically what it did was it repeated the textbook fund twice in the ad, and it gave an erroneous bottom line that's higher than what is actually being proposed here tonight. And it also had an erroneous number for the school capital improvements, again, higher than what is being proposed here tonight. We can still move forward because what's being proposed and potentially adopted is lower than what the original ad said. And as soon as the error was detected, the paper quickly fixed the error, and it was advertised properly, I believe, tonight. But I wanted to make sure I disclosed that. And I had a citizen actually call me and bring it to my attention Friday. Hat tip to Hal Muller. Appreciate that. We got to the bottom of it, got it fixed, and I'm glad to have that taken care of. So with the school budget in 2021, of course, last year, 2020, they had an ADM they were basing their budget on of 1170. This year, their ADM that they're comfortable with projecting is 1130. I think we all heard from the superintendent. It's really hard for them to guess how many kids they're going to have on September and in March to get that ADM dialed in. More and more families are I guess, transient. I don't know what the proper term is, but if they're not here on certain key dates, we can't count them. That's my understanding. And again, I think there's no one more frustrated with how the state funds K-12 education than our school boards across the state. But as Winston Churchill has said, with democracy, the only thing worse than democracy was everything else we thought of or tried. The only thing worse than the school funding model that we use here in Virginia is everything else they've thought of and considered, evidently. So here we are, continuing to do it the way we do it. Key revenue items affecting the school budget. At the time they adopted their budget, they had an estimated increase of $643,000 in state funding. That tonight is not the case. That has already been adjusted by the governor, and we're still kind of waiting to see on final numbers. I want to make sure I disclose that. That's another reason we may need to revisit what our local contribution to the school systems are. Estimated decrease in federal funds of $17,000. I need to double check that. That may be a typo. I think it actually increased $17,000, but I'll come back and check that. That's trying to get this done while we're doing COVID stuff. And of course, I know this item is right, the proposed decrease in local contribution of $256,000, which reflects our reaction to the current pandemic and trying to maintain a more level funding. The net school general fund budget, if a large number of the state funding comes through, which we already know it's not, would have increased $407,000, a total of $17,939. I don't guess I need to mention anymore that number has changed. I'm pretty sure the board understands that. School food fund remained pretty much stable at $562. Total school textbook fund is $121,000, which includes the state funding, not the second printed number in the first ad in the paper. Total school capital improvements of $390,000 brings us to a total proposed Board of Supervisors school budget of $19,013,221, an overall decrease of $72,000, but again, primarily because of a decrease in school capital improvement. I think Reggie's got a question. Yes, sir. Reggie, you're muted. I can't hear you, sir. Yeah, I couldn't hear him, Kevin. I think he unmuted.
Hold on a minute.
Yeah, I'm trying to watch my screen and watch the board members too. So if y'all do have questions, I can see you, but help me out with that. Make sure you call me out, because if I get rolling, I may not look over and see you.
Mr. Williams, check that microphone down in the bottom left and see if it doesn't have the line to it. Yeah. Okay, there we go. There you go.
Can you hear me, Matt?
Yeah, we hear
Yes,
you.
sir. I can hear you loud and clear now. Thank you.
All right, on the total school food fund, how does that work?
Okay, well, yes, sir. It's a good question. And that is an increase in federal funds estimated. School food fund, we do not put any local money, local tax dollars into the school food fund every fiscal year. Now, that may change because less and less students are buying school lunches, as the superintendent had said. But the school food fund is made up primarily of three categories: local sales, which are local sales for lunches, state funds, and federal funds. And because it's made up of federal funds, some of the requirements with a school food account is it needs to be maintained in a separate fund or a separate account. It can't be lumped in with the school general funds. That's why we show it separately. And the state also has some similar requirements, I believe, for the textbook fund to make sure that we're meeting our local required effort to leverage state funds.
And getting back to the capital improvements, where you got 390,000, how does that
Yes, sir. That's a good question, and you've given me a great segue into my next slide. So would you mind if I move forward? I can come into it in the next slide. Yeah, very good. All right, so capital improvements I'll come back to the capital improvements reserve fund. So the school capital improvements are made up of $390,000. Those specifically are 3 new school buses at $330,000 and a capital outlay for carpet replacement, I believe, at the Middlesex Elementary School of $60,000. Those items make up the 390.
You said,
Reggie, does that answer you?
you said 3 new school buses?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay.
3 new school buses. And I think that, as John had said, we're buying 2 buses to maintain our commitments to Spotsylvania County to continue to allow us to buy buses through them, and along with the electric bus. And I think some of that money is going to be grant related too, isn't it? Not John? I'm murdering that. I know that we've got this budgeted for 3 school buses, but.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, well, we can come back and maybe get some clarification on the Dominion Power Grant. All right, so let me go back to the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund. This fund was established in 2012 as a set-aside in annual contributions to fund capital improvements. It was set aside in conjunction with the mills tax. When we got permission from the voters to levy a mills tax, we pledged half of the mills tax collections would be used by this fund. So take all of our mills tax collections, half of them are pledged towards the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund, currently being designated for sewer debt service. Of the remaining half of that half goes to the general fund, can be spent for anything. And the other half of that half is pledged for fire and rescue contribution to help supplement the donations the county gives to the fire and rescue services so they can continue to maintain volunteer organizations serving our E911 needs with rescue and fire service. This year, we have, again, budgeted the $854,000 specifically for future sewer debt service. We will have some debt service, we think, on that for the Cook's Corner system as we finance after we bid that out, and that's currently underway. And there is 0 budgeted this year for contingencies, and that's a decrease from the 51 I think we budgeted last year. County capital improvements. Yep, go ahead, Reggie, I'm sorry.
I got one more question. I think in the budget, we allowed $700 and some thousand for the solid waste. What is that, and where does it come from, and where does it go?
Well, it comes from general taxation. A large portion of that 700,000, let me find it. It's 863,000. Several different things make up that line item. Our contribution to the Virginia Peninsula Public Service Authority, who handles a lot of our solid waste in the county. That's a big portion of it. Also, the expense for us maintaining our local convenience centers comes from that. Any maintenance we need to do, or the continued gas and groundwater monitoring that we're doing at the closed landfill, comes out of that. And I believe, Betty, not to put you on the spot, did I miss any major category for solid waste on that one?
I can tell you, well, it includes litter, all of our convenience center operations, everything for maintaining the landfill, the closed landfill, like you said, including the post-closure work that we have down there and grounds maintenance, and then all of the payments to VIPSA for our trash disposal and recycling disposal.
Okay, I got to understand it. Okay, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can walk you through it line by line. Come on in, we'll sit down and look at it.
Okay.
All right. So going back to capital improvements, the county capital improvements, you have 2 capital improvements. You got the Cook's Corner Historic Interpretive Trail. That's a grant match to help continue to leverage grant funding for the Cook's Corner project. And we have the Multipurpose Path project, which is also a grants match We don't know if the state's going to move forward with the grant on the multi-purpose path, but we probably need to budget the monies for that just in case they do, and of course in case the county wants to proceed with those multi-purpose path projects. The board's heard me say this, but I'll say it, I'll repeat it again. Difficult financial times when the interest rates plummet, the first reaction for most local governments are to retract, not do a lot of spending on capital improvements, because you're really just trying to make the budget balance and handle your operating expenses. It's unfortunate because as interest rates go down, we can afford to do a lot more with our capital improvement dollars. And it's a great opportunity, if you can afford it, to build capital improvements projects when as it relates to the interest rates. I don't think interest rates have been this low in quite some time. So if there are capital projects that we could move forward with, now's a good time. The only worry is, and this was pointed out by a citizen, a volunteer in one of our committees, can you get the material to do the project? Are there going to be supply shortfalls because of the pandemic? Are we going to be able to get the materials necessary to build things? Financing is one component. You got low interest rates, so you can do more. But are you able to get the materials?
Matt?
That's another. Yes, sir.
I think that's something worth more discussion, just not tonight, because I'm seeing in my industry, some of the material shortages that we saw are already starting to be replenished. So the various curves, there's the curve we've all been talking about, but then there are curves that are lagging.
Right.
And I think that one is going to come to our favor, and it will be coincident to some extent with what likely are to be even better interest rates 6 months hence. So while that is a concern we need to watch, I think there is a real advantage to those inclined to use government spending in a recession or depression backdrop. And I think we should really be prepared if the opportunities do come into focus, as I think they might. I'm thinking of Raleigh Park. I'm thinking of multi-use path in particular, and even the water project. I mean, we have major expenses out there, and we have some opportunities coming that I think will align well with the disaster that we're going through. So just food for thought.
No, it's very good food for thought. And as tempted as I am to put the executive director of the Water Authority hat on, I won't for tonight's purposes, because we're hitting on about 8:40. But well, I'll just move on because I'm tempted to. But I totally agree. So FY21 tax rates, no increase in real estate tax rates, remains at 62. No increase in personal property tax rates, remains at 210. No increase to jet skis, RVs, boats under 5 tons or over 5 tons. Everything remains the same as of at this time. However, the board is considering increasing its current 2% tax on transient occupancy, or lodging tax as we refer to it often, to 5%. Given what's facing our lodging industry right now in the pandemic, the board, I think very, very wisely so, by consensus during the work sessions, has delayed the implementation of that tax, at least partially until, well, not at least partially, entirely, until January 1, 2021. This budget does include $52,500 in estimated estimated revenue, assuming the board will pass the increase and implement it January 1, 2021. This isn't an effort to try to help our campgrounds and our lodging industry. They're hit hard, and it would not be conscionable in many people's minds to hit them with another tax, even though it's a pass-through tax that passes on to campers and to the transients coming through the campgrounds. The feeling of the board, at least at the time, was that we delay the implementation until January 21. This budget does include that funding. And I guess the last thing I would say tonight about that, it would require a public hearing and amendment of our current lodging ordinance, or transient occupancy ordinance, which we have between now and January 1 to do that. So this budget includes revised lodging tax revenues, as I've discussed. This budget includes capital expenditures for preliminary design and possible construction of the multi-phase, multi-purpose path projects specified in the county. And just for this board's attention, this was a major strategic objective of the Board of Supervisors back in 2020. This budget also includes funds for county and school obligations for capital improvements relating to leveraging of the state and federal grants with regard to Cook's Corner, and Dominion Power Electric Bus Initiative grant funds for the electric bus program or initiative. It brings in fund balance for reassessment and operating expenses, as I've mentioned. And as I said before, we can almost assume that we'll probably be visiting this budget early and often to make further adjustments as the needs and lay of the financial landscape in the state changes. So this by no means is the last we'll probably hear on this budget for this coming fiscal year. I'm sad to say.
Not
Yes,
to beat a dead horse, but the opportunity to get funding from outside of the county right now, both at the federal and state level, it needs to be almost priority one by the department. And I almost want to suggest an initiative where every department needs to at least try to get some sort of money from federal and state coffers, because there's just the world is awash in federal and state money right now, and it's going to those that are willing to pursue it. And if we don't pull down some grants, shame on us.
Very well put. And I've spoken to the superintendent about this very issue. All kidding aside, I hate to call it a grants task force, but we could impanel a group of us to work with the schools, help them get grant funding and pull down federal and state resources and vice versa. Just get a team of the willing to stay on top of it is my intention, to give it the attention it's deserving. It is very challenging for rural communities to even understand and, well, I don't want to say understand, access some of these opportunities because, well, sometimes it's hard to have staff dedicate time and attention to the matter long enough to get it done. But I think that's been stated very well in previous work sessions. I think the superintendent and I have heard that loud and clear.
Well, I can tell you, I am in the same boat as you. I'm not just a supervisor. I've got executive director or chairman of the Broadband Authority. My staff gets paid $750 a month, and we're working on regional and local initiatives, public private partnerships. You just have to will it done, and we're not there yet, but there's money out there, and if we're strategic and we work hard at it, we can significantly impact the kind of ugly budgets that we have, and it's really our duty. I mean, the federal and state governments don't come out with this kind of funding regularly. Anyway, I'll get off my horse.
Very well put. Well, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. Of course, we have public comment coming up, and I will wait. And if there are any questions I can answer of the board after the public comment, I will, of course, do so. I will remind the board you cannot vote on the budget tonight. You're not allowed to by law. You got to have a 7-day cooling off period. You will meet again unless some major circumstance happens on May 7th to entertain a motion to adopt the budget or amend it or move forward in some fashion. So the May 7th meeting is for adoption.
Matt, one final comment from me. Last year, we revisited with the Commissioner of Revenue the elderly and disabled tax exemption or reduction to make sure it was adjusted for inflation. I think it's appropriate that be an annual adjustment so that we don't fall behind or forget, because while those may seem like small changes in the nominal value of the dollar every year, for the people that are relying on those exemptions or reductions, those are big dollars. So I would ask that you approach the Commissioner of Revenue and see if she would consider making that an annual adjustment that is automated and just already understood so that we don't fall behind by 6 or 8 years again.
Absolutely. And we are endeavoring to work very closely with the Commissioner of Revenue on a number of fronts for a number of items where we, I think May has brought a very interesting take on how she wants to move forward as the Commissioner of Revenue. And of course, I, as County Administrator, pledge to her to support her in any way, shape, or form possible. And I know I speak for Betty, Heather, and myself, where we endeavor to try to help her be successful in that position. And we're looking at not just that, but many other items that probably need a little bit of attention. So duly noted, John, and we'll be done. And that's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Matt. Well done. At this time, I'm gonna open the public comment, but I'm gonna give the requirements. Chairman will invite the additional person other than the board members and staff attending the meeting to make the comment. Those attending the meeting with video capability will use their hand raise feature to speak. Those with audio capability will use the to dial 9 feature on the phone, which will indicate to the moderator that you wish to speak. Use 6 to mute your phone. Each speaker will give his or her name and address for the record. Each speaker or individual will give one opportunity to speak during the public comment period and each public hearing item. All comments and all remarks will be addressed to the Board of Supervisors, not to the audience. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. At this time, Kevin, I'll give this to Kevin and Betty. Betty with the clock, Kevin with the participants.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to reiterate, *9 will raise your hand if you'd like to participate by phone. And you can, if you're on the Zoom app, you can raise your hand through the Zoom app. And I see we have one here, Mr. Chairman, and that is the number ends in 5463. Would you state your name and where you're from?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
This is Linda Muller at Kilmer's Point, and I just want to say I'm opposed to delaying the implementation of the 5% lodging tax. When I listened in on the workshop the other day, I thought Matt had said that we would be deferring $122,000 of revenue by starting it in January. Tonight, when I look at the numbers on the screen, I'm thinking that was a total amount that you expected to get if you implemented it in July. But anyway, I'm still opposed to delaying it. All the businesses in the county have been hurt by this shutdown. And I think by trying to play favor and win favor with the campgrounds, you're picking winners and losers again. And I don't agree that that's the Board of Supervisors' job. The lodging tax itself is not paid out of the lodging business's pocket. It's a tax that they collect from their customers. These customers are coming into our county, using our resources, have the same access to our police services, our rescue, our fire departments. Why shouldn't they have to pay or share in the cost of providing these services? Why should the board remove monies from our rainy day fund to balance the budget when there are options to generate some revenue? I'm asking the board to implement the 5% lodging tax effective July 2020 and adjust the amount that you're removing from our rainy day fund accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
I think Hal wants to say something, and we're both listening in on this line. Can he speak now?
Yes, let him speak.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I live at the same address as my wife, I think for tonight at least. I'd like to address the same subject on the campgrounds. I brought up the lodgings tax when Walt Hurley still owned the campground. I was the only individual in the county that was before the Board of Supervisors asking to have a lodgings tax installed. There were several people from the recreation industry that were there, spoke against it, and said we were going to have dire trouble with getting customers to our county if we raise those taxes. We didn't do that at that time. The very next year, Walt raised his rates by 15%. We did not see an adverse effect in the community. I'm saying to you that every penny that we can find today that doesn't affect the poor or the people that live on the water is something that we need to do. They come here and the people in the campgrounds use every resource we have. The fire department, the ambulance service, the sheriff's department, our roads, and they pay little, if any, taxes. They don't even pay personal property tax in some of the areas on their campers because they're not registered here. This is a minimal amount that they can pay. So I am very much in favor of that being enacted on July 1st. It is not going to impinge on the profitability of the campground owners in any way, and it won't affect any of the people coming. Even the seasonal people do not pay that because they are residents, they're not transients. It only affects the transient population. So please reconsider this if you would. You're going to be coming back next year and the year after for more monies, and I would suggest to you at this time, go to Keith Hodges and ask Keith Hodges if he would not sponsor a service fee of $1 or $2 per night for the transients in the campground to come to our development of recreational facilities within the county and our tourist businesses. I really appreciate everything you've done in the COVID today. I don't envy you guys one bit. Thank you again. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Hal.
Mr. Chairman, I don't see any other hands raised, so I believe that's everyone.
All right, well, thank you. Any board member has anything before we adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, if we may, please, can we leave the public comment open for just a second since we are doing it electronically? And then if no one responds, can we please close it?
Okay.
And I do have one written comment.
All right, if you could read that.
Betty, how long is this one?
Not nearly as long as the last one. Less than 3 minutes. This is from Dan Downs. I finished looking at the proposed budget. During these past few days, I've been looking at the spreadsheets for projected revenue and the expense side after adjustments. Many of the projections on the revenue side, I believe, will not be anywhere near the numbers on the revenue side as pertains to business revenues through depot and meals tax collections will not be met. We never began to see our usual taxes during December, January, February. Then March, April came along, and as you will agree, have been slower and lower, and in many cases, almost nothing. Every business has been hurt, and some have closed altogether. Any food business, as applies to meals tax, have and are struggling, and most of the small businesses may not recover until maybe January of next year, if then. We are and always will be a seasonal county. I am not in favor of using rainy day funds. We will need these dollars for rainy days near the end of FY21. Postpone some future planned expenses, please. I feel it must start at the top. Administrators, superintendents, department heads could be part of the conversation, as well as school board and the board of supervisors should lead by example and volunteer to forego 5% of salary and perhaps even supplement such things as office supplies for all departments. This will boost morale and reduce expenses. It starts at the top. I also think that to use rainy day fund money is dangerous. We will need every cent of what has been suggested because these issues will be here in our county through the next 10 months. Even the real estate firms will be in danger on both sides, purchasing and selling. Also, how can a suggestion be made as to the lodging tax being delayed for campgrounds and nothing be suggested to relieve for all the businesses I know from my former employer this is hard to swallow. But in management, we had to step up during hard times from the late 50s through the late 90s. Sincerely, Dan Downs, Hartfield, Virginia.
All right, thank you, Betty.
Okay.
Does any board member have anything? If not, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Unfortunately, I do have something, Wayne. I just want to respond primarily if Linda and Hal Muller are in favor of raising taxes, I sit up and take notice. And I appreciate their comments and what Dan Downs is saying about rainy day funds versus pushing off tax burden on the campgrounds. And the other comment that I heard about Walt Hurley raising the rates. I mean, it's a healthy industry even still. And I think it's merited that we consider having. I take issue with the comment about picking winners and losers. And I really take issue with, again, it just suggests that we continue to be making really bad decisions. And there's complexity that I think the people making these comments understand. I was in M&M this week and I was listening to one of the employees say the parking lot's never been this full. That is not the case in all of our businesses, but some of these businesses are actually doing better. And of course, we're not going to go and try to dig into their pockets because they're doing better. But the reality is there are different scenarios and different free market enterprises are being impacted at different rates that can't be fully understood statically right now. So I think I understand what the board was thinking. I think I understand what the board was thinking when we had our work session and we thought, wow, the campgrounds have been heavily impacted. But I've been impacted by the public comments tonight, and I would be supportive of rethinking, maybe not going all the way to zeroing out, taking from the rainy day fund, but some compromise where we acknowledge that these campgrounds have healthy margins. And I'd go on the record also as saying that we felt compelled to start this whole mask odyssey in part because we felt like the campgrounds weren't going to listen to us anymore. We would not have had to have our previous call if we felt that relationship was tighter. And I don't mean to raise their taxes in a punitive way. Absolutely not. But at the same time, if we felt like we lost a little bit of a relationship value to the point where they were tired of listening to us and our feelings about our community, that I think we represented tonight, that we do listen to our constituents and we do consider what they're saying. And we were trying to tell this business, hey, some of us, many of us are concerned about an influx of campers on May 1st. And we basically said, well, I don't think we can go back to the campgrounds. The timing of that message from the constituents that have commented here resonates with me. And thinking about next year's budget being worse than this year's, which was worse than last year's, which was worse than last year's, that's something I think is worth reconsidering, because we're going to have a big deficit next year. If we think this year's was bad, I just think we're really going to have a hard time making that up. So those are my thoughts given the public comments of the previous meeting and this meeting. And I appreciate the public commenters.
Mr. Chairman, before you move on, I apologize for interrupting again. This is Heather Lewis, but we need to officially close the public comment, please, sir.
Okay. We have a motion to close the public comment at this
So
time.
moved.
Do I have a second?
I think, Mr. Chairman, you can just announce it's closed, but I just
All
wanted
right,
to get
okay,
that done.
well,
Sorry.
All right, okay, well, okay. I want to close the public comment right this time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. And at this time, if we don't have any more comments from any other board members, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I will make that motion, Mr. Chair, but I'd like to first just say I'm very, very appreciative of staff. I've seen other counties that have stepped through remote meetings. I know that there's extra hours that go into this, and it's just been impressive how they've come together and worked late hours, and this came off fairly seamless to me, and I'm deeply appreciative, and I'm sure all the supervisors are as well. And with that, I move that we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I may have one other comment.
Yes, go ahead.
John, I appreciate what you just said about the transient occupancy tax, and I will confess that it was unclear to me. I never processed that the tax was on the less than 14-day camping as opposed to those residents who had been kept out of their campground because it was not open for an extra month. And so I'm willing to reconsider our approach there. I also, I don't know what the details are behind the estimates that you've made, Matt, but I would anticipate that the volume of transient camping may be pretty severely impacted by the COVID job losses, but I don't know that. So long way of saying I'm happy to reconsider that consistent with what you said, John.
And doesn't it feel good to know that we're responsive to public comment? And thank you to the public commenters again. We are listening.
All right, thank you on that. If doesn't anyone
Now
have
I'll
it-
move we adjourn.
Okay, roll call. We had a motion and probably second. At this time, Betty, give us a roll call.
Mr. Coons,
Aye.
Mr. Mansfield,
He raised his hand saying aye.
okay,
Okay,
Mr. Williams,
Aye.
okay, Mr. Kimbrough,
Aye.
Mr. Jesse.
aye. Everybody have a good night and a safe weekend.
And that is
Thank-
adjourned until your Tuesday meeting at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Right. Okay.
He called me a few minutes. I gotta get how you